Bueno, chavales, pues esta vez os traigo un vídeo nuevo y esta vez os voy a traer Hellblade, que es un puto juegazo. Tengo muchas ganas de jugarlo. De hecho, voy a empezarlo a jugar con un amigo primero y luego os lo traigo al canal. Pero esta vez vamos a ver el reportaje de Hellblade, que es súper mega interesante, antes de empezarlo. No lo he visto, pero he visto que a la peña le ha gustado mucho este reportaje y tal, porque explica un poco todo, de qué trata el juego, cómo lo han hecho, un poco de historia, ¿no? Y es algo bastante interesante, así que vamos a verlo. Vamos a verlo. Espero que no contiene escenas del juego tal, bueno, da igual. Me pone que tendría que verlo después de jugarlo, pero me suda toda la polla. Esta es Senua, que es la protagonista, y es que sufre un trastorno. Tiene esquizofrenia. Sufre de psicosis, vaya. Y el juego trata de que, vamos, por lo que he leído y tal, trata de que ella ha perdido a su amante y tiene que ir como al mundo del infierno nórdico para recuperar a su amante. Y sufre de esquizofrenia, o sea, escucha voces. Y lo guapo de este juego es que el volumen es 3D. Es decir, las voces se escuchan en tu puta cabeza si lo juegas con los cascos. Por eso os recomiendo ver los vídeos con casco. O auriculares, vaya. Hellblade. Bueno, ahora lo explicarán un poco todo.
Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is a video game about Senua, a Celtic
Una guerra
warrior
celta,
on a
vale.
vision quest into Viking territory.
En territorio vikingo.
But what sets our hero Senua apart is that
¿No
she
es?
suffers from
Tiene un
severe
trastorno
psychological
psíquico
illness.
grave. Eso es lo que he leído yo.
The original idea for Hellblade was to create a classic hero's journey, a journey of suffering, but one where the fantasy world is not another planet or alternate universe, but a world that is constructed in Senua's mind. But to do so would mean putting psychotic mental illness at the center of the experience, a subject that is still considered taboo, and a challenge that was both terrifying and exciting in equal measure. In Hellblade, the starting point was a newly discovered Celtic goddess called Senua in Ashwell, Hertfordshire. When first discovered, her name was thought to be
Una
Senua,
diosa.
a name which I
No lo
liked and
sabía eso.
kept. I wondered if Senua might have been a Celtic warrior like Boudica, who stood up to the Romans. While the Romans had conquered all of Europe, there was a group of Celts up in the furthest reaches of the Roman
Buah, el Imperio
Empire
Romano. A
that
ver,
could
yo
not
si
be
tuviese que
conquered.
elegir guerreros, en plan, si me dicen, oye, tú,
And so the Romans built a wall called Hadrian's Wall that
¿en
spans
qué
across
ejército,
Britain from sea to sea
imperio
to keep
te
the
hubiera
British
molado? Yo diría
barbarians
romano.
at bay.
A mí el
The
Imperio
Picts
Romano
were
me
known for their
flipa.
war paint, painted
Pero
on
si
with
tuviese que
woad,
elegir otro,
and
será
their matted
vikingo.
hair clumped
A mí
with
los
lime.
vikingos también me flipan
And so
muchísimo.
Senua would be a barbarian
De hecho,
Pict in this
la
image.
mitología que más me gusta es la nórdica.
What's your name?
Diría que nórdica, egipcia y griega,
I haven't
diría.
seen you before.
Aunque la japonesa también está guapa.
Don't live how much.
Pero bueno.
Oh, Zeno's daughter.
I have to go.
Wait.
Orkney is off the coast of Scotland and was inhabited by the Picts, steeped in history and mystery, and so I made Orkney Senua's home and set the stage for a crisis. In the late 8th century, the first Vikings landed on the Orkney Islands. The population of the Picts crashed thereafter, replaced by the Norsemen of the 9th
Me voy a subir
century.
esto un poco.
Were they wiped out? We don't know for sure, but it would seem likely given the reputation of the Vikings. The Northmen's brutality is legendary. High-ranking leaders and chieftains of the
Buah,
tribes
es que los vikingos estaban muy guapos,
as
Estaban muy guapos. Y encima es que peleaban todos.
The most
Mujeres,
brutal of these
niños,
sacrifices was known as
hombres,
the Blood Eagle.
niñas, todas. O sea, peleaban todos.
I
Todos eran
imagine
guerreros.
Senua as a young female warrior
flipan,
who
la
returns
verdad.
home from exile to find her partner, Dillion, brutally
Es que hasta
sacrificed to a Norse
los...
god
Hasta las
by
personas
these
mayores
Finnish warriors from a faraway
peleaban
land.
también, si hacía falta.
I imagine the horror of this moment and how it would have dragged her deep into mental torment.
Buah, es que este juego tiene sonido 3D, O sea, escucho las voces aquí, bro. Aquí. Vaya locura.
I came to learn that the Celts had a sophisticated and nuanced perspective on the nature of mental disorder. One term they used was Gelt. A Gelt is a man or woman who has been driven mad by a curse,
Buah, tengo muchas ganas, de darle a este juego.
The Gelt would take to a life in the woods in
Tengo
search of
muchas ganas.
punishment and purgation. And so Senua became a Gelt, cursed by darkness, looking for redemption in the wilds. Another word the Celts used in reference to mental disorders was druth, meaning fool, or liar, one who utters the words of God. They tell of the mad sinner who flees battle into exile and takes on a beastly nature, growing feathers on his body. The character called Druth in Hellblade is based on a little-known person called Findan, an 8th century Irish Celt who was captured and enslaved by the Vikings, but eventually escaped to Orkney where he became a monk.
I will tell you my stories of hell, if I may walk with you.
Buah, es que claro, veremos...
Upon meeting Senua, it would be his stories that fuel her quest deep into their
Veremos
world of
dioses en
gods.
este
The
juego.
Northmen say the world will
Porque
come
esto es
to an
mitología
end.
nórdica full.
The sun will grow black, the earth will sink into the sea, the stars will disappear, fire and water
Buah, qué
will
guapo,
meet, flames will play against the sky, the heavens and earth and all the world will be burned, all the gods will be dead, and the warriors of Valhalla and people everywhere. Senua, prepare yourself for Ragnarok, for it is nigh.
So the stage was set for a new adventure, a journey into the Norse underworld called Hell, a vision quest fueled by madness and myth, a fantasy that was created by Senua's own mind, and one that we would experience through her eyes.
This is your mission. This is your quest.
Buah, la banda sonora es muy top,
To
Me está
make a game
gustando.
about a warrior with psychotic mental illness as its central theme was fraught with danger. Mental illness such as psychosis is still taboo and rarely acknowledged in a century of cinema. Never mind
Claro,
the
encima es
new
que
medium of
en
games.
aquella época
Where it
evidentemente
does feature, it
cura
often
no
conflates
había,
psychosis
y hoy
with
en día
psychopathy
tampoco.
associated with a lack of
Hoy en día
empathy.
tampoco, o
It
sea,
is
hoy se
unfortunate
puede
that these
tratar,
two words sound so similar that they are used
pero no hay una
interchangeably in
cura que
media.
te lo cure
I must admit
totalmente.
that I didn't have to look
O sea,
very far to discover
y en
my
aquella
own
época
ignorance
menos
of the
aún.
subject. So we reached out to Paul Fletcher, psychiatrist and professor of health neuroscience at University of Cambridge.
Psychosis is a descriptive term, and it refers to having a loss of contact with objective reality. So it's characterized
Claro, es que
by
encima este juego
two main sets of symptoms. One of them is hallucinations, where somebody
ha habido gente,
experiences
tipo médicos
perceptions when
y
there is
gente
no
especializada
actual
en este
thing
tema,
out there to perceive.
que ha ayudado a los creadores del juego
And
a
the other
crear
is
este
delusions,
juego,
where
¿no?
somebody comes to very often bizarre, unpleasant, frightening beliefs when there's no good evidence in favor of them.
There's no doubt about it.
Buah, qué locura. Es que escucho las voces en mi cabeza, bro, con los cascos.
And the goddess Hela holds his soul there.
We reached out to Welcome, a biomedical research charity that spends billions on research and awareness programs aimed at improving health.
Mental health hasn't always been presented in the media in a way that is particularly helpful. It can be challenging to engage people with the subject matter, and there are a lot of preconceived ideas about mental health, and particularly schizophrenia and psychosis. So we hope our support allows the team to continue to collaborate with Paul Fletcher and with those who have experience of psychosis to create a game that provides
¿Lo
a
ves?
fresh perspective on
O
the
sea, ha habido
condition and
muchísima
allows
ayuda de
audiences
gente
to engage with it
especializada
in a way that
para
is
hacer este
truly
juego.
possible in any other
Especializada en, pues eso, en los
What
trastornos
started out as a
mentales.
brief consultation
Buah,
convinced
bastante
me that
guapo,
we were only scratching the surface of an immensely deep and
Bastante
interesting
guapo,
subject
tío.
that could enrich and change the very nature of the game.
That's cool. Thanks so much for coming in.
Pleasure. Thanks. It's really interesting for me. I'd love to be involved. It's fascinating.
Our understanding of psychosis is still very much a mystery, and ways of treating it are still primitive compared to physical illness. After all, it is easy to see the pain and suffering caused by physical diseases or physical trauma. It is not so easy to see the mental suffering and trauma of severe mental
Buah, qué mal
illness.
rollo, tú.
But what if we could find a way to see it? Games are capable of drawing you in for hours on end.
En verdad es que es una que es un putadón. Claro, bueno, para la persona que lo sufre yo creo que no, ¿no? Porque
Actively involving you in
será
a
algo
world that
normal
functions
para
with a
ella, ¿no? O
different
para
set
él.
of rules.
Pero tiene que ser un putadón tener un trastorno mental tipo como la psicosis, vaya. Tiene que ser una putada.
But how can we simulate something we have no first-hand experience of? Professor
O sea,
Charles
que te hablen voces en tu cabeza, yo me rayaría. Pero claro, la persona que lo sufre, pues...
And crucially, we know that hearing voices is a part of ordinary life for many people who don't meet the criteria for mental illness.
Yeah. Oh, that's not him in real life.
We know voices vary according to where they appear in space. Voices can appear far away in the distance, they can appear right there in your ear, they can seem to be coming from inside your head.
Guau, qué guapo. Es que lo del sonido 3D está muy guapo. Y más si es este tema, ¿sabes? De escuchar voces.
Which records the 3D spatial position of sound, replicating the way sound is heard by human ears. It gives you an incredible sense that the person you are listening to is right there beside you.
Están explicando cómo han hecho lo del sonido 3D, ¿no? Para que se escuche.
Rachel Waddingham from the Voice Collective came to our studio with 2 young voice hearers to speak to our team. We talked at length about their experiences and they listened to our tests, giving us feedback on how we could improve on it.
Everyone hates her.
Hostia, qué voz.
It's very hard to represent what this experience is like, partly because it's such a personal, intense, emotional experience. It's testament to how Ninja Theory have been listening to what the researchers are saying, but also crucially listening to the experts by experience. What they've come up with is so compelling. It's by far the best representation I've heard of what these experiences are like.
Buah, qué locura, bro. Es que te juro que se escucha...
Other common attributes of psychosis are visions and flashbacks. We met with Recovery College East, who work with and care for people recovering from severe mental disorders. A group of service users gave us their first-hand account of what they experience.
Sometimes when the vision or what we're seeing is too much, it becomes more difficult until eventually we perhaps don't see anything.
The people we spoke to, the stories they told, were fascinating, harrowing and mind-boggling. The reality of what people experienced was vivid, far exceeding what I could possibly have imagined. We went away itching to represent some of these visions and flashbacks in the game.
My heart is so, love is so far away. Don't you know how
Bastante guapo, la verdad. Tengo muchas ganas, tío, de darle a este juego. Y encima ha ganado muchos premios, Creo que ha ganado 5 premios en los AQUI de los juegos. Ha estado nominado al mejor juego del año. Y luego ha ganado un premio al mejor juego de no sé qué, pero no es de los AQUI, sino otro premio también bastante tocho. Tengo ganas, Y os lo voy a traer aquí al canal, evidentemente. Lo voy a subir por capítulos. Evidentemente. Y los escenarios son brutales, Son brutales. No es mundo abierto, es full historia, lineal, Y encima he visto también que cuando mueres, como que el brazo se te va poniendo negro. Y si llega, o sea, si se te cubre todo el brazo de negro y llega hasta tu cabeza, mueres. Y tienes que volver desde el principio otra vez con la historia. Y son 6-8 horas de historia el juego. Bastante guapo, tío.
To refine our work, we continue to hold meetings with Recovery College East over the course of a year and a half, showing them what we had achieved so far and refining the in-game representations based on their feedback. With their help, flashbacks, visions and changes in perception were woven into the story and gameplay of Senua.
The students that are involved in this project are incredibly excited about being involved. They have described the experience as being important because it values their lived experience and shows that despite what we have been through, all of that experience becomes valid, that actually it's something that we should all be talking about.
The experiences described range from beautiful to frightening beyond comprehension. I heard of a girl who has to live with an angry voice screaming at her, slamming on her doors and walls 24 hours a day. I met someone who would often see hanging corpses in a room, so real that she would sometimes try to rescue them. The panic and fear that comes with such visions is entirely understandable, and it can be a living horror for some.
Worthless, weak, pathetic. Go on, feel sorry for yourself.
Guau, cómo se escucha. Y vaya voz, por cierto, vaya puta voz. ¿Os imagináis tener esa voz?
And so I was perpetually torn in making Hellblade. Had we gone too far with our representations or not far enough?
Broken and lost. Just like your soul.
Uy, cómo se ve. Los gráficos son una película, es una puta película.
In some ways, voice hearing and visions were the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. There's another aspect of psychosis that is much harder to explain, but one that I think video games are uniquely able to represent, which are often called delusions.
People begin to see patterns in the world. They begin to link things that most people wouldn't link. Most of the things that we might think would be coincidence or
es de hacer puzzles también.
Nevertheless, that
Bastante guapo.
Salience or importance for them.
One individual described how everyday words, sounds, colours and objects were steeped in meaning to him, forming a strange and sinister puzzle that he was determined to solve but could not quite get to the bottom of.
También hay algo de terror, también he visto. No mucho, pero sí. Terror psicológico, vaya.
Voices and phantasms and terrors, and they're completely immersed in it. They believe in it.
We often invite people into the studio to play the game. In one of our playtests, they played through much of the game, making associations between runes, secret messages, and the threat of darkness that stalked them. There are many things that happen in the world of Hellblade that make perfect sense within the context of Senua's mind. The dark rot that's killing her slowly from within, the secret runes of the gods that block her path to Helheim, and strange associations that exist in the game to confuse you. To complete Senua's quest, you have to internalize and accept the logic and meaning behind these things to progress. Afterwards they said that they didn't see much evidence of mental illness in the game. People with delusions of all sorts would argue the same thing, that they are not aware of their experience being abnormal in any way.
I need this sword. It's important.
Representing perception changes and thinking patterns within Hellblade gives us a set of symptoms common in psychosis. But people with lived experience were keen to emphasize another point, that it is wrong to define a person by their symptoms. Quite often, the illness comes not from the symptoms, but from the stigma, isolation and mistreatment that comes about from the rest of society.
They say that I'm cursed. What if they're right?
I needed someone to portray Senua, someone who could believably internalize her suffering.
¿Cómo se escucha? Es que es una locura, tío.
Jürgens, our video editor, had been a
es que os juro que se escuchan los ruidos, o sea, las voces.
Without realizing it, she had already auditioned for the role, and I knew her well enough to know that I didn't have to teach her to act, but to relive her own internal pain.
Esta es
As
la
often
actriz.
is the case, those who have suffered mental anguish are never far from us. My hope is that by creating a compelling and aspirational character in Senua who feels very much real, albeit in a fantasy setting, we can provide a lens into her reality, a different one to yours, and this is where storytelling comes into play. I imagined her life based on common threads in real people's lives. She was always prone to psychosis as a child. Her mother Galina also heard voices and had visions, so perhaps there was a genetic aspect. Or perhaps it was cultural, as she lived within a world without science, of gods and superstition, as exemplified by her druid father Zimbal. Psychosis developed in her late teens to early 20s and was exacerbated by stigma and isolation at the hands of the clansmen and her father.
This darkness, it's spreading.
The trauma of seeing her lover Dillian sacrificed tips her over the edge, making her remodel her reality around a concept that connects everything: the darkness. So the question is, what Senua experiences real? can only be answered by saying, yes, it is real. It is her reality.
All of her suffering will have been for nothing. It's just a matter of time.
Towards the end of the project, service users and professionals that had collaborated with us were invited to see the near-final game. It was a chance to see if the game had reflected their views.
Junio de 2017, no sé cuándo salió este juego, la verdad. No sé si fue ese mismo año, en 2017 o 2018.
Has been really important, and being able to bring in my perspective and what I see and what I hear, and having that built into the game has been a real privilege. It's gritty and it's meaty, and there are some tough subjects in there that are being tackled with honesty.
Qué guapo, tío. Muy guapo, tío, muy guapo. Encima es súper interesante lo que dicen, Fuera coña, joder. O sea, está bastante...
I was blown away by it today, absolutely blown away. It was just fantastic to get the opportunity to use our experience in a very creative way. There's nothing tokenistic about the work we've put in. It feels like we've been listened to, things have been taken on board, and I think there was a lot of realism in the game itself, and it feels very authentic.
Hellblade will give people a good experience of what it's like to hear voices and have those experiences. I'm glad that the guys at Ninja Theory kind of asked us to come along and help them build an experience that's positive when it comes out, and get myself a copy and have a go.
I think all the way through I was really inspired by how the conversations have translated into the game in a way that I think I didn't imagine was possible. So wonderful, really wonderful.
Encima, este año van a sacar el segundo juego de Hellblade. El segundo, o sea... Sí, bueno, el segundo juego, vaya, este año. De hecho, ya han sacado el tráiler, que os lo dejaré al final de este vídeo para que lo veáis. No se sabe si lo sacarán este año o el año que viene.
To make some of the stigma around voice hearing and other experiences go away.
Pero el tráiler ha salido.
For me, it was really exciting to see something that I explore scientifically being represented so beautifully in a character who's trying to penetrate the mysteries of the environment in which they've been placed, with all of this strange uncertainty and noise and conflicting information that they're getting. I'm very excited by this way of trying to represent mental illness, because I think it actually might be offering us insights that we wouldn't get from pure scientific explorations, and actually giving us quite an empathic view of what it might be like.
Mental illness has been with us for as long as we have been on this planet, but why? Why hasn't evolution stamped out this weakness from within our gene pool? I often pondered this question until I realized that the question had an inbuilt flaw. It assumes that being and thinking differently is a weakness. The only reason we have computers, spacecraft, medicine, poetry, art, and yes, even video games is because individuals are able to simulate new abstract realities in their minds and share them with the rest of us. We need people to be willing to see differently in order for us to progress and survive as society. And we need to be open to these new ways of seeing.
Buah, qué locura tiene que ser hacer un juego,
And share it with you.
Es una puta locura. Y más un juego así currado, ¿sabes? Bueno, en verdad todos los juegos son complicados de hacer, evidentemente. Pero unos son más complicados que otros tienen más trabajo. Muy guapo, tío. Buah, muy guapo. Pues nada, chavales, suscribiros, darle me gusta al vídeo, comentar si queréis. Y nada, hasta aquí. Os traeré este vídeo, este juego al canal. Y nada. Ahora os dejo el tráiler del segundo juego que van a sacar este año o el año que viene. Y nada, así que nada, nos vemos. Chao.